never dreaming I'd ever be a Catholic, because I'd always been taught that the Catholic Church was basically the most perfect counterfeit of true Christianity. They use the same words, they use their Bible, everything, but it is a counterfeit. And the Pope is the Antichrist, and the Church is the whore of Babylon, and all these things. That Catholics had prayed to Mary instead of to Jesus. They had tradition instead of Scripture. They worked their way to heaven instead of by grace and faith. All of these misconceptions. And I never dreamed in a million years I'd ever be a Catholic. In fact, I spent a good part of my time evangelizing Catholics. I could usually pick a Catholic off a tree like a ripe peach because they hadn't been taught to defend their faith. And I met my wife and we got married and had our family and homeschooled our kids. And up until the time I was 39 years old when I converted, my wife and I had never once set foot in a Catholic church. We had never once met a Catholic priest. And sadly enough, we had never once met a Catholic who could explain or defend the faith. And then our journey, people say, what was it that you saw beautiful about the Catholic Church? You know, what was it, like the St. Peter's glowing in the sun, what was it that made you want to come to the Catholic Church? I said, nothing. There was nothing about that. And the Catholics that I knew were the biggest argument against the Catholic Church. Why would I want to be a Catholic? My journey did not come and begin with seeing anything good about Catholicism. It came about by seeing the problems within Protestantism. Sometimes you have to find out you're sick before you look for a doctor. I had to see the problems. There are very quickly three of them. What is worship? I realized, my wife and I, that listening to someone preach on Sunday morning was not worship. No matter how many guitars you had and how many speakers and how much you pump up the volume, that doesn't make worship. There was something missing. We didn't know what it was until we discovered the Eucharist. Second of all, I loved the Bible. I have 20,000 books in my house. Most of them are about the Bible and church history and so on. But the more books I bought, the more I realized evangelicals, even my own tight-knit circle, we couldn't agree on what those words meant in that book. Who is the judge of what this means? Should you baptize an infant or not? Can you lose your salvation or not? Over and over, these main important issues would come up, and there was no judge. Good evangelicals disagreed. So I had the problem of who interprets the Bible. There was no one. It was me. I had to become Pope Steve. I had to become the final word for my own life. Then the third one was morals. What does God expect me to do with my body, with my money, with my life? And I realized that even you could pick any street. On one side of the street, you have Burger King, McDonald's, Pizza Hut, KFC. And when I go to lunch, how do I decide where to go? What do I feel like today, a pizza or a hamburger? On Sunday morning, I drive down the road and I see on this side Baptist, Methodist, Lutheran, Nazarene, Assembly of God. How do I decide what church I go to? Americans usually decide the same way they pick their restaurant. What do I feel like today? Do I want to not have a guilty conscience? So I'll go to a church that says everything's okay. Do I want to sing and have entertainment? Then go to one that pumps up the volume with the cappuccino holder cup. You know, you put this cup right here and you get ready for the show to begin. How did I know what to do with my life? Morals. Because there are churches up and down the street that would fit any morals I want. I pick them based on what I wanted. And I realized, both because of what worship was, who interprets Scripture, and what about morals, there was something seriously flawed with Protestantism. And it was then I could almost have become an agnostic. I remember thinking, how do I even know the Bible's true? Who tells me there's 27 books in the Bible? How do I know that? Who has the authority to close the canon and tell me? And then a friend of mine converted to the Catholic Church. His name was Al Cresta. I know you know him. We had been good evangelical buddies for 12 years. And he announced to me one day that he was becoming a Catholic. The words out of my mouth were, Al, that is the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life. You're too smart to be a Catholic. How could you do this? And then my wife and I went on a mission to prove him wrong. And in a year's attempting to prove him wrong, I proved him right. And in May 22nd, 1994, our whole family, us and our 4 kids, with tears running down our eyes, were all received into the Catholic Church. That's the short story.
How long after that was it you wrote your first book?
Actually,
because that one had such a big impact on
Crossing the Tiber. It's still a bestseller. I mean, it's still, I get emails from people who are being converted because of reading that book. And it shocks me because it was never going to be a book. I wrote the major part of it before I was received into the church. I was explaining to my father, who was a Baptist deacon, the best dad in the world, still alive, 92 years old. Him and my mom just celebrated 72 years of marriage. I remember him clenching his fist and saying, you must be backslidden to even think about these things, a Catholic. He was so angry. And I sat at the computer that night and I said, Dear Dad, you're the best father in the world, so I owe you an explanation. And I started to type out to him the things I was thinking. What the fathers, the very first Christians, before there was even a New Testament, what did they do? What did they think? How did they practice worship on Sunday morning? And as I'm writing to my dad this letter with tears in my eyes again, becoming a Catholic's made me a big crybaby, by the way. I'm writing to my dad with tears in my eyes and explaining to him why I was thinking about this. And that letter that I wrote to my dad became Crossing the Tiber.
Yeah, it's a great book. Now,